Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masech the Zevachim daf Kuf Yud Beis. We're going to begin on Kuf Yud Aleph by the lengthy Mishnah at the end of the Amud. Chatas shekibul dama b'kais echad. Let's say when it comes to a carbon chatas, in which you received the dam and it was accepted in only one kos, and which that so far is fine. So nosim b'chutz. Now, let's say you took it outside, then you brought it inside, or for that matter, if it was inside, then you brought it outside, then you're chayiv. Shekul roi bifnim, says Rashi, bifnim chayiv. So the case of chutz that was outside and then brought inside is k'nei nitzvah. For the boy misni bifnim v'chazav v'nasim b'chutz. Actually, we need this case that it was inside, you brought it outside. The chiddush is the avagav the shirayim who you can say, well, these are just shirayim. So what's the problem? So why would you be held accountable for that? Why are you chayiv? So mechayiv alayhu v'stam krim nechemya. That he holds that you're chayiv even when it comes to shirayim. So that's the chiddush over there. Okay. And then the Mishnah says, Kibul Dama b'shtei kaisais. Let's say now you're makabel not in one but two kos, which we've had this situation before. Nosin shnei bifneim potter. So if you brought both of them bifneim, you're potter. However, shnei b'chutz chayiv. If you brought both of them outside, you're chayiv. Says Rashi, achas, you're chayiv only once. V'im haisel yediyah b'netayim chayiv shtayim. However, if there was a set of yediyah in between the two bringings, then you're going to be chayiv for each one. So it's like behelam echad b'shtei halamais. Fine. So since you did it all in one shot, you're going to be chayiv once, even though it was in two kosos. So that's the chiddush in that. Echad b'fnei v'echad b'chutz potter. If you brought one inside and the other one was outside, your potter. Now this is a big chiddush, and says Rashi, even according to Rabbi Nechemia, who says that apparently the shirayim are ma'akev. Nonetheless, he says, as Rashi, the ksaver kos echad oises chaver dichoy, that one cup can like push off the other one. Hilka chavil shirayim ohavi. It's not even considered to be shirayim because of the other kos. So even though it's true that you made a mistake by one of them, but since the other one was bifnim, therefore that one will pater the one that was b'chutz. Echad b'chutz v'echad bifnim. So it was in this order. However, if it's ech b'chutz, apparently you brought it out one first. So you receive a kapara for the inner one, but since the first time you did it, you first brought it out. So therefore, you are chayav for that one. And again, even though one of them was problematic, but nonetheless, that doesn't cause problems for the other one. We don't say, as Rashi we don't say that because the second one, which was the first one, was brought b'chutz, is going to cause problems for the first, which is inside, but rather it's mechaper. Okay. All right. Let's look at question. I think I wrote 11 over here. Chatas shekibul dama b'shtei kosos nosin shnei b'chutz chayiv. So kama chatois chayim. This is what Rashi said. Behelam echad chayiv chatas achas. V'im haislo yediyah b'netayim chayiv shtayim. So that's an important Rashi, as we already saw. Okay. So lamahadam daima. So what is this whole element of this case comparable to? Lamafresh chataso. Let's say you separated a carbon chat. V'avdan got lost. V'hivrish acheres tachtal. And therefore you want to designate another one in its stead. Then you found the first one. So v'hari shtehen oimdois, and both of them are now in front of you. Shachat shtehen bifnim potter. If you shecht both of them inside your potter. Shtein b'chutz chayiv, you're chayiv for each one. Achas bifnim, if the first one is bifnim, v'achas b'chutz potter, because you did the first one properly and the second one is not an issue. Achas b'chutz v'achas bifnim chayiv. Chayiv al chitzayin of apanimus b'chaperes. Kashem shedama pateres b'sara, just like the dam paters the basar. Kachi pateres as basar chaverta. That's also going to pater the dam of its chaver. Says Rashi, the afal pi shepsula, even though it's possible. The eshchat shteim bifnim koi is referring to they were both shechted inside. The ashmina the heicha the munach b'kaisais, where the dam was put in cups. The kadam the zarkis dam achas. You did this recon with one of them. Poitersas chaverta min ha'meila. Then the other one there will not be a din of meila mishum chata shekipru baleha, because we already say that the carbon was already mechaper. The karmel and chatos hameisais lo nehenen v'lo malin. So we say, even though this dam it's considered to be chatos mesa baleha, so what do you do with it? We say lo nehenen, however lo mahalin. So it's not a carbon chatos anymore, since the other one was already mechaper. So we say the me'il is removed on the other one as well. Okay, let's keep on moving. Let's now look at Kuf Yud Beis Mid Alf, starting a new test. Okay, Bishlama b'chutz v'chazer v'nosan bifnim. I understand the case of the Mishnah, which said that if it was it was b'chutz, and then afterwards v'nosan bifnim shekul royli yois bifnim, that it was supposed to be inside. Avol bifnim, if it was originally inside v'helen b'chutz, and then it was taken outside, the leftover shirayim nenu. So what's the problem? Why are you chayiv in that case? It's just shirayim. So we already know the answer to this question. So hamani Rabbi Nachemi he dermi shirei hadam shehikrivan b'chutz chayiv. He also holds when it comes to the leftover dam, you're chayiv on it. So Rabbi Nachemi ema seifa. So it says kibul dama b'shnei kaisais. If you are makabel the dam chatas in two separate kosos, nosen shnein b'fnim potter, shnein b'chutz chayiv. And then it says like this: echad b'fnim ve'echad b'chutz potter. Now, why does he say echad b'chutz your potter? That's shirayim. V'yomrim nechem yishirei hadam shekriim b'chutz chayiv. So it's seifa tanu l'tanakama Rabbi Lezer Rav Shimon Yomer kais oyisa dichel chaveroi, that one kais could reject the other one. So in other words, since you already did one bifnim, so now the one that's afterwards b'chutz is considered to be pushed off, and therefore you are going to be potter. Where do we see this? We saw it already. Can't remember. It was on Daf Lamidal not too long ago. As you can see over here in Rashi, v'oimer kois oisa chaver dichoi. Dukatani chata shekibul dama ba'arba kosos. Let's say when it comes to the dam of a carbon chatos in which you're makabel in 4 separate cups, v'nosan arba matanos mi'achs mehen. So he said, what happens if you only did all of the matanos, but you did it with one of the kosos? What do you do with the other 3? So hu lavado nishbach liyasoid. So only those shirayim from the kos that was actually used to do the blood applications, that will go on the aside. However, nishbach lo amma, the other 3 are poured onto the amma. However, according to Rabbi Lezer Rav Shimon, he says kul nishbachim liyasoid. No, they all go into the aside, even though they weren't used, because he holds kos echad oisu es chaver shirayim. So even though, what do you mean shirayim? It was never used for there to be leftovers. Leftovers means you use some of it. Yeah, but there was leftovers from kos echad, so therefore that also applies to the other one. Kos oisa dichel chavero. Okay. So you lost an animal, now you replace it. So the Gemara says, well, what's the whole purpose of even telling you this? So Amanu Rabbi, the Yomer Avuda b'shas afrasha mesa. It says that when it gets lost at the time of the separation, so the din is will die. V'hachi kaimer. This is what it means. Taima the avda. The only reason why we say this is because you lost the first one. Here for shtei chatois. Let's say you lost both of them. Lachrayas chad minayu miikara oilahi. Then one of them is going to be an oila. Ukarav huna imarav. Yem rav huna marav oshim shenitek uriya. If you have a carbon oshim that was designated was supposed to be grazing the shachtu stam and you shechted it, we say it's kashul oila. So that's what he says. That's what he says. Let's look at. Let's see. We saw that Rashi. This is a long Rashi over here. Avuda b'shas hafrasha mesa chata shekipru baleha. You have a carbon chatas in which the owner already received kapara. We hold the azla misa. When it comes to a chatas, that's one of the 5 situations where it's killed. Even if it wasn't lost, at the time where the second one was mechaper, el b'shas afrasha. Nonetheless, if there's kapar by one of them, we say the other one dies. Looking a couple more words in Rashi, v'hachi karmer shikar v'chaverta. When you're makar of one carbon, potter didamel kais dichoi mishum dekarebi svirule the omer lamisa ozla avla hamafre shtei chatois lachrayas mikara. If let's say you have 2 animals originally designated lachrayas, that just in case I lose one, shim talvud hachas yischaper b'chaverta diafil reb moidel. In that case, he even agrees shetim tischaper b'achsamehen there's shnia tira. The second will only be grazed. We don't say it's not the case of chatas mesa baleha. It's rather a situation because you had 2, so then you used one, so the other one we say is going to graze. The damil oilus kayas l'mizbeach, because it's comparable to a kayas l'mizbeach, as Karav Huna the Amarav, as he says by an asham nitakariya kikain terumas asham. Let's say you have the tamura of a carbon asham, asham shemesu balov, or let's say the owner died, so the din or kapara. So we end up saying kol shebechatas mesa. Anytime when there's a situation where the carbon chatas, the animal would die, but asham raya. When it comes to asham, you let it graze until it gets a mum. The nimuch bebeis and v'yarmelo yirev shachtu stam. Let's say kashul oila. So let's say it had to be moved to grazed. There was an akira. There was some movement. So you'll be chayev for the second carbon chatas since it's as like an oila. So Maria says, "Mi dami hasam asham zachar but oila zachar avochatas nekevahi." So when you talk about, it's not shaykh. Haloi chazi he guful oila. When it comes to a chatas, it's not shaykh to be an oila. When it comes to an asham, it could be an oila because the animal itself is a zachar, right? It says Rashi, dahanekevahi. So Amrav Chia Mustane, which is the name of a place. B'sayer nasi, says Rashi, she hifresh shneim achrayis dahasam zachahu. In that situation, when it comes to a nasi, he does bring a male animal as a chatas. So it's possible that we could establish it in that situation of a chatas where it is a zachar. Okay, so in that case, you would be chayiv for the second carbon chatas since it is likened to an oila. Okay, maybe we'll see another question over here, possibly. Possibly question TA2. Yeah, question TA2, which is Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Hifresh shtei chatois lach rayis, where you separate 2 of these chatois. The hikra v'achas b'fnim v'achas b'chutz. Be'ez sug chatos yeh dino shepater min al chutz. When would be pater? Be'ez sug chatos yeh hadin shechayev. So when would you be pater and when would you be chayev? So if it's a case of chatos nekeva, then you would in fact be pater. However, Rav Chia, we're talking about Sir Nasi. In that situation, you would be chayev. Sir Nasi chayev the chazi l'oila, right? Because it's fit l'oila. So since it's chazi l'oila, so therefore you're going to be chayev in that situation. That's TA2. So let's mark that down, and possibly TB5. Hifresh de chatois la'achrayis v'hikr v'achas b'fnei v'achas b'chutz b'eis sug. Okay, so got this totally wrong. So again, this is on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. This is TB5. So let's mark down the correct answer. So if it's a chatas, which shehi nekeva, so then in that situation, pater. However, when it comes to a seir nasi, which is a chatas zachor, so you're chayiv, since it's chazi l'oila. Okay, so that's same question. I got it wrong both times. Hopefully I'll get it right if they ask it again. Okay, Hanulach HaSheichet V'Hamala, Hanulach HaSheichet V'Hamala, Hanulach HaSheichet V'Hamala. I believe we're now going to be seeing the last parak in Zevachim. How do you like that? Okay, Paras Chatas. So when it comes to the Paraduma, which in itself, the Avodah is B'chutz, Sarfa Chutz Megita, and let's say it was burned outside of its pit, which is a specific spot where it's typically brought. V'chein sir hamishtalech. Now the sir mishtalech, which is the scapegoat, which is also an avoda, which is typically done outside, even though the gur or the lottery is done inside. Shehikri b'chutz potter. Shenemar bel pesach ol moyed lo haviu. Kol she'ein roy l'bal pesach ol moyed. Anything that's not meant to be brought inside in chayav olav. So therefore, these fall into this category that you are going to be potter. Okay. Gita Rashi is lashon gas kolim makam omuk, some deep place. Says Rashi, well, I mean in sheichet kachim b'chutz. It's not so if you shech these things outside, right, or you burn them outside in shalob makam mitzvah, not in the right place, the Torah says you're potter because it has to be something which is only when it's fit to be done inside, and you did the shechita b'chutz or the avoda b'chutz, the ha'olah b'chutz. However, in this situation, it's not even supposed to be done inside, so therefore you're not going to be chayiv. Okay. Haroiva v'hanirva, when it comes to these animals cohabiting with a person, v'hamukse v'nevid, having to do with avodah zara of these animals, amacha v'esnan, for zaina v'akilayim, when it comes to forbidden mixtures of an animal, v'atreifa v'hayaytza daifin, as well as that animal that comes out in a natural way, shekrivan b'chutz potter. In all these situations, also you're going to be potter. Shnemer lifnei mishkan Hashem, kol she'in roy level lifnei mishkan Hashem, ein chayav olav. So all these things are not fit to be brought ever. So on this, Rashi asks, Hasir hamishtalech osid lavo hagril v'zvadois, that it will be oil moed. Of course, is why is Rashi said over here? Okay, it's really going on the same thing. Okay, Bali Mumin. So when it comes to a Bal Mum, Bain Bali Mumin Kavuin. So look in Rashi, Oiver B'loisa say, this is Shachan Amid Beis, Hoyav Roy level Achazman. So if it depends, if it's a Bal Mum, which is Oiver, apparently you are going to be Chayav, because even though right now it's not Shaykh to be brought, but eventually it will. So Bali Mumin, Bain Bali Mumin Kavuin Bain. Let's continue to Amid Beis, and you'll notice there's no Gemara in sight. It's all the way out. We're gonna this whole thing is one long, beautiful Mishnah. Now that makes sense because right now they cannot be brought bifnim. However, Shimon Omer Bali Mumin Kivun Potter. In this case, you will be Potter. It looks like there's no taisus. This is just straight Rashi. As we said, Bali Mumin Oivin Chay B'loisase, as we saw in the previous Amud. Okay, Turim Shul Higil Zmanon. When it comes to turtle doves that it has not reached their time because they have to be a certain age in order for them to be brought, as the pasuk says, Turin is mashma their gedoyim lo katanim, v'nei yoina is the opposite, that they're supposed to be small and not large, and therefore, and Rashi says ipsulin mitchila sasihu ve'eluch, when it changes to this gold-like color, that's when you know it's not allowed to be used anymore. Shavar Zmanon, Shekriban B'chutz Potter, because they're not shaykh to be used. Rav Shimon Omer B'nei Yoina Shavar Zmanon Potter, because they're too old. However, Turim Shohigia Zmanon B'loisase, because again in the future they could be used. Oisai V'as B'noi. So when it comes to Oisai B'noi, it says you're not allowed to shecht the mother and its young on the same day. You have to wait. If you do, then it's not a good carbon. Now, but again, you could have waited. Umachusar Zman, when it comes to Umachusar Zman, says Rashi, She'amarnu Potter, Ben Shu Machusar Zman Begufo, Ben Shu Machusar Zman Bebalim. We'll see we'll understand what that is in the Mishnah. Potter, Rav Shimon Omer, Harizeh B'loisase. Rav Shimon Omer, Koshu Roy Level Achar Zman, anything which could eventually happen, that could be brought eventually, even though not now, Harizeh B'loisase. Ve'ein lo karis, there's no din karis. So Chachamim Omer, Koshin Bo karis, ein bo loisase. Now, Mechusar Zman, Ben Beguf and Ben Bebalov. As we said, when it comes to Mechusar Zman, whether it's the carbon itself or the owner. So what does that mean? Mechusar Zman Bebalov. What's that referring to? So So the person right now can't bring it because he is Tameh for various reasons. And therefore, Shikrivu Chatasa V'Hashamim B'chutz B'turin. Because they can't do it now, so therefore, since they couldn't bring it lifnim, so they're also going to be pater b'chutz. However, when it comes to their oila as well as the carbon shlomim, so in that situation they will taka be chayiv. And the Gemara is going to ask, so what's the whole din? What's going on over there? Okay, the Gemara is going to talk about that. Okay, let's look at question 12. Hazava zav yoledis shekrivu chatasav oilasam toichime molois before their time b'chutz him dinam bekaris o belav o paturin, right? Since they will be mutter potentially later, so al on a carbon chatas b'chusar zman. Rav Shimon says it's a lois. Someone says you're pater. When it comes to al oilasam the ruoil in the dava, things which can be brought as in the dava. So then you're going to be chayiv. Okay, so we're going to end up seeing that probably a little bit more, but that's the basic idea of the Mishnah. Okay, so hamal mebasar chatas, person who brings up from basar chatas, mebasar asham, mebasar kachi kachim, basar kachi kalim. When it comes to all these different karbanos, umoiser oimer, the leftover of the carbon oimer, shtei halechem. On Shavuos Lechem Apanim from the Shulchan, V'shiri Menachais, the leftover of a carbon mincha, V'hayoytzik V'hapoises, one who pours the oil, one who crumbles the mincha, V'haboil, one who mixes them together, V'hamoilech, salts of V'meinev V'magish, someone who waves or brings it close, Masader as a Shulchan, you prepare the Shulchan, U'mametiv as a Neirois, and you set up the candles, and Rashi says, Medashin es amanoyer b'boiker. So in all these situations, of course we're talking about b'chutz. V'akaimetz v'makabel damim b'chutz potter. So interestingly enough, even though all these things, you would say you should be chayav because they're all done lifnim, nonetheless you're going to be potter. Ve'ein chayav l'lav lo mushum zarus. You're not going to be chayav when it comes to any of these things. At least you won't be chayav misa for any of these things if a non-Kohen does it. And the Rashi says, Hoyel v'yesh achrein avoida ein zar chayav aleha misa. So in Masechtas Yoma, which we've also said before, it only is when an avoida tama, something which is the end avoida, like zurika, there's a chiyam misa. Avoida is matana, and velota avoida siluk. It's only putting in but not taking off. So like the removing of the lechem hapanim, or the lavoina bezichin avoida tama v'loida sheish achrei avoida. So that's the reason why there's won't be a chiyah misa of zaros. Lo mishum tuma. So if a kohen is tameh who serves in that situation, v'lo mishum mechusar begadim, there's no isser of Mechusar begadim because the din of Mechusar begadim has of chiyah misa because a kohen who's Mechusar begadim, he has the same status as a zar. V'lo mishum shlo rachas yadav raglayim. Again, if you didn't wash as a gzer shava, as Rashi brings down chuka, we went out from Mechusar begadim. Again, regarding that the avoda is null and void, as well as regarding misa that there's not going to be din misa. There's no chiyah misa. Okay, so Anshul Hukam Mishkan, before the Mishkan was established, Hayu Habamos Mutarais, so we actually allowed these private altars, the Avoida B'Bechayris, and also the Avoda was done by the firstborn, as Rashi brings down the pasuk in Shemos. It says V'Yishlachas Nari B'nei Yisrael V'Gomer, that's how it was done even before the Mishkan in the Midbar. We originally wanted the Bechor, firstborn, were the ones that were going to be doing the Avoda. Could you imagine there would have been a lot of people there? Mishahukam a Mishkan. Once the Mishkan was established, Nesr Habamois, their bamos were not allowed, which means there's an isser of shchuti chutz from that point. The avoda b'kohanim, and then all of a sudden we switched over to the kohanim having to do the avoda and not the firstborns. Kachi Kedoshim, and of course all of this is going to be brought down, explained at length, basically the rest of this Masechta. Kachi Kedoshim nechon lifnim min kalayim, which we already know. This is very simple. That Kachi Kedoshim are eaten within the kilayim. That is their designated place, namely a chatas, an asham, a mincha, has to be in the chatzar ol moyed. However, Kadoshim kalim b'chol machni Yisrael. It can be in anywhere machni Yisrael, as Rashi says, kamoy shehin ruyin b'diglehen, which basically means all like in the old city of Yerushalayim. Okay, fine. So with that said, we continue with the next part of the Mishnah. So Bol Gilgal. So let's say now they entered into. Of course, this is referring to Machne Yisrael. Okay, fine. Even the third outer Machne, because we're in the Midbar now. Bol Gilgal. So now we cross the Yarden. At this point, the Ol Moyed, says Rashi, v'hukva Ol Moyed sham sheva shanim. So it took 7 years to conquer, 7 years to divide Eretz Canaan at the time. So the Mishkan was in Gilgal. So at that point, the Mishkan was no longer in the Midbar. We're no longer outside of Israel. We're in Israel. The Mishkan is in Gilgal, but Hutra Bamois. We do allow Bamois at that point, as we're going to see later on, as Rashi is going to quote the pasuk in Navi, Ish kol yasher be'enav. Okay, so Kachi Kedashim Necham Lifnim Min Kalayim. Still, you had to be eaten within these curtains. Kadashim Kalim b'chol makom. There was no din of Kadashim Kalim, says Rashi. Hanechalim lo kar b'bamas yachid. When it comes to Kachi Kadashim, they could not be brought on a regular bama. Kol she'in nidev v'nidev in kar b'bama katana. Anytime there's not a neder and a dove, it cannot be makam in a small bama. Then mincha b'bama. You can't do a carbon mincha there. Hilkach, even though we had a machlokas about a mincha before, at least in the midbar. Hilkach oila hu dahavoy ve'enechelas. Oila hu ve'enechelas. So it's like an oila. V'chatas v'ashim b'bama sibor hu dekarve v'nechol lefnim min kalayim. So when it came to all these karbanos, the Kachi Kadashim had to be in the Mishkan by Mishkan Gilgal, and that's where that's what is done. However, the Kadashim Kalim, in which we did allow on a Bama Katana, therefore it can be B'chol Malkum any place. Bol Shiloi, then we went to Shiloh, which again there was the Mishkan Shiloh, which is the time of Eli HaKohen. Says Rashi, it was already after they already divided it up, Eretz Yisrael. And again, you have Eileen, that's the beginning of Shmuel Aleph, with Chafni and Pinchas, who ended up eating more than their share. Nesu Abamai. So again, at that point in Shiloh, it became more strict, and therefore they were not allowed to have private bamos. V'lo haya sham tikra ela beis avadim bilvan. There was just stones, milmatan on the bottom, v'yurios milmal, and curtains above. V'hi haisa menucha kachi kadashim. And this was its resting place. This was its resting place. Kachi Kadashim Nechol Lifnim Min Kalayim, same thing. Then when it comes to Kachi Kadashim, had to be within these curtains. The Kadashim Kalam Umaiser Sheni, which is an interesting. We finally were introduced to Maiser Sheni. Bechol Haraya. Anytime you could see it, that was the what was allowed. Anytime you could, as long as you can see Shiloh. And then, of course, unfortunately, there was the Mishkan was conquered, the Plishtim took over the Aron, and tragically, Chafni and Pinchas's father Eli HaKohen died, etc. So eventually, Bol Noiv v'Givoin. So then it was brought to Noiv and Givoin, which is after the destruction of Shiloh. Says Rashi, V'Nilkach Aron b'Yemei Eli Bol Noiv v'Givoin. So it was brought there. So Hutar Abamos. Kash Kadashim Nechol Lefnim Nekalayim. Still, again, it had to be brought there. However, Kadashim Kalbachol Ari Yisrael. Anywhere in the city of Yisrael is fine. Says Rashi, Habachol Makam Shehu Sham Oisa Bama Bekrivan. Bol Yerushalayim. Finally, we get to Yerushalayim in the times of Shloim HaMelech. So obviously, Nesar Habamos Lo Hayilhen Heter. There's no longer a Heter period, and that's it. That this was its nachla. Basically, this is where the place in which it will remain. This will be its menucha and its nachla, as Rashi says. Fine, there'll be no more bamos. Kachi kadashim nechol b'fnim nekalayim. Kachi kadashim kalim meiser shin lifnim minachayima. So this is where, when it comes to kadashim kalim, it has to be within the wall of Yerushalayim, which is the makom, which is called the Machne Yisrael. In the midbar, just like in the midbar, there was Machne Yisrael, there's Machne Shechina, Machne Levi, Machne Yisrael on the outside, just like a dartboard. So too, when it came to the base of Mikdash, you have the Makom HaMikdash, and then outside of it, outside of the Har Bayis, you have outside the Azar and outside the Har Bayis, you have the old city of Yerushalayim. Anyway, so Kadashim Kal Mamir Shil B'Mim Nechayima. Kol Kadashim Shekdishan B'Shas Isser Habamois. Actually, let's slow down. Let's look at question 13. Be'elu Mekaimos Hakimu B'nei Yisrael Mishkan. Where do they establish a Mishkan? Mishkan Nichnasul Aretz Ad Shenivnu Yerushalayim. It's a good question. And in those times, were bamos allowed? So in Gilgal, bamos were allowed. In Shiloh, they were not allowed. And not even Givain, they were allowed. So only in Shiloh, which was like a more designated place, it was not allowed. Kol Kadashim Shekdishan Bishas Isra Bamos. Any kachim that were makdish at the time when you were not supposed to have bamos outside, which basically means it was like shchutei chutz, even Bishas Isra Habamos Shebachutz, Hari Elu Basei V'loisasei V'chayv Lev Kares, and your chayv kares for, again, bringing it outside. As the pasuk says in this, it says in Devarim Yud Beis, it says, Lo savi l'hakrib kabbalah Hashem with nimishkan Hashem dam yichashiv lishahu v'nichar seishahu mikerav amoy. Hikdishim b'shas heter abamos. Let's say you were matish in the time of you were allowed to have bamos. Tekrivim b'shas isra abamos b'chutz, and you're makrivit b'shas isra abamos b'chutz. Hari elu b'asei v'losasei v'ein chayav v'lein kares. So a time in which there's a heter bamos, but you still did it b'chutz, so there's no isra kares. Tekdishin b'shas isra habamos. If you're makdish in the time of the isra habamos, tekrivim b'shas heter habamos, and you're makdish it at the time of Isra Bamos, but you were makriv it at the time of the Heter Bamos. So there's still an asay because you were makriv it, because you were makdish it at the wrong time. However, there's no lois asay because you were makriv it b'shas Heter Bamos. And we'll go through all these permutations in the psukim. Okay. Ve'elu kadashim kareven b'mishkan, and these were the kadashim that were makam in the Mishkan. Kadashim shekdishu Mishkan karbonos sibor, namely the karbonos which were karbonos sibor. Says Rashi, Bizman shahaya hamishkan begilgal v'huter bama. So it was in Gilgal, and they were allowed a bama outside. Nonetheless, there were certain things that had to still be brought in the Mishkan, which we said before is karbonos sibor, namely also Kadashim Kalim. So it says Kadashim Shekdishu Mishkan Karbanos Sibor Kraven B'Mishkan Karbanos Hayachid B'Bama. A carbon yachid was allowed to be brought out. A carbon yachid could have been brought on a bama. Okay. But Karbanos Hayachid B'Bama. Karbanos Hayachid Shekdishu Mishkan. If you have a carbon yachid that was brought in the Mishkan, Yakir B'Mishkan. You could do so. You make Reven B'Bama Potter. But if you're a Makran on Bama, your potter. What does that mean? So it says Rashi, Shipirish b'shasik dishin almanasa krivan mishkan. Even though you were allowed to do it outside on a bama, you said, no, I'm going to do it inside the Mishkan. You turned out not doing it. In that situation, you are potter. Now the truth is, mihu also l'shanois mishim kasher nedar tetishmar v'yasisa. You should still do what you said you were going to do, which means you made a condition. You were going to bring it into the Mishkan, so you should have done so, but you're not going to be chayiv for it. Fine. The Elu Kadashim Kraven B'Mishkan Kadashim Shigri B'Mishkan Kaman Asiva Kaman. Okay. Yakriv B'Mishkan V'Yemikriven B'Bama Potter. Uma Bein Bamas Yachid Ubama Sibor. What is the practical difference between, let's say, Gilgal, Noiv, and Givain, in which was a Bamas Sibor and a Bamas Yachid, right? So a Bamas Sibor, in which we allowed other little Bamos. During that time, it was still called a Bama Sibor. What's doing that in a Bama Sachid during those times? Smicha. So when it comes to the smicha was only done in Gilgal, Noiv, and Givain on that Bama's on that Bama Gedoyel, as it's called, or Bama Sibor, I should say. V'shchita Safain, that the requirement, it has to be in a specific location in the north when it comes to Kadashim, Kachi Kadashim. Kufya Gimel Aleph, Umaton Saviv, and when it comes to the applications in the different places of Dam, the two blood applications, which is 4, the Tenufa Hagasha of the mincha. Yehuda Aimer ein mincha babama. So this is, as we saw before, that there was no mincha that was brought on a bama. We're going to explain later on how does he know this. V'kihoin, when it comes to a kohen, he needs to be the one who does it. When it comes to the bama sibor, ubigde sharis, v'kli sharis, has to wear bigde kahuna, and he also has to have kli sharis as well. Vorech nichayach, as Rashi says, quoting the Gemara earlier in Daf Mem Vav, shish devarim hazevach nizbach. There's 6 things over there that were mentioned. It has to be l'shem reach. It has to be for the sake of a reach lafuki ivarim shetzalan, excluding limbs that were roasted. Ve'olun she'en behem mishum reach nichayach. Okay. Umechitza has to have umechitza ledamim, says Rashi, chuta sikra. This is referring to on the mizbeach, the line which separates the top from the bottom, lahavdil bein damim helyenim ledamim tachtainim, in which of course the carbon oil is below the chuta sikra and the chat is above it. Varichu tedai v'raglayim, which is only required by the bama sibor. Aval hazman, however, to say that if you have a psul, a thought process of a machshava chutz l'zmanai, so you're going to be chayev. V'hanaiser, or a person leaves it over. V'atame shavin b'zeh u'b'zeh. In that situation, we say everything is equal. Adkan.